Hi there, my name's Tony Walker and welcome to my home in County Clare, Ireland. Over the course of this video, I'm going to show you how to make drone reeds from cane using the traditional method of cutting the tongue. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is some of the tools and the materials that you're going to need in order to do this. I'm then going to talk a little bit about how to select the best piece of cane so that it works well in your own set of drones. I'm then going to show you how to prepare the piece of cane, how to cut the tongue, and then how to get it voiced. And finally, I'm going to show you how to balance and fine tune it so that it works really nicely within your own set of drones. All of the chapters on this YouTube video are skippable, so if you want to skip ahead to the fine tuning and adjustment part, that's perfectly fine, but I would recommend that you watch the entire video. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is an overview of the tools and materials you're going to need in order to make your drone reed. And the first thing that you're going to need is some drone cane. You can buy this stuff directly from the Bridle in Dublin. You can also get it from Medir in Spain. It comes in various sizes, depending on whether you're making a bass, a baritone, or a tenor reed. You're going to need some unwaxed hemp. Again, you can get this from MPU in Dublin. I just have some normal black cotton thread. When it comes to cutting the tongue, it's essential that you use a closed back razor. The blades are much thinner than a Stanley blade, and you really do need to use one of these. You will also need some sealing wax. You can get this from any good craft shop. Some cobbler's wax. Again, you can get this from MPU. There are a few things that I'll use that, while not essential, they do make the job slightly easier. So I will talk about that when the time comes. Needle files are always great. This one is a triangular needle file. It's got a nice sharp edge so you can actually score your piece of cane before you cut it. This is a round needle file. It's great for getting in and actually cleaning your piece of cane. Pencil always comes in handy. You're going to need a lighter and a candle, piece of cork. I've got some 240 grit sandpaper here. Stanley knife is always great. Cutting mat, not necessarily essential, but it's always good to have. You can get these from any good craft shop. And when you're doing any cutting or scraping, I'd always recommend wearing a pair of glasses, safety glasses, if you don't have normal glasses. These are my reading glasses. They have plastic lenses. And that is pretty much everything that you're going to need. So we can now move on to how to select the piece of cane. Okay, so when it comes to cane selection, what I'm really hoping is that you already had a drone reed that was working really well within your set. And what we're going to do is actually copy this reed as faithfully as possible today. I'm going to make a new bass reed for my set based off of this particular reed that I have here. If you don't have a drone reed, then the following table will give you a good idea of the dimensions that you're going to need for a bass, baritone, and tenor for a concert pitch set. The dimensions are in millimeters and inches. Feel free to take a screenshot or pause the video here. So the good thing about drone reeds is that they're not an exact science. There is a little bit of flexibility when it comes to these things. You don't need to be quite as precise as you do with a chanter reed. There is definitely flexibility when it comes to the length and the internal and the external diameter. But what I've found is the most important thing is the internal diameter of the reed itself. Now, again, there is some flexibility either side. You can be a bit bigger, a bit smaller, but if you can try and get some drone cane that's as close to the internal diameter that you already had working well in your set, then that's great. If not, then when it comes to the fine tuning and adjustment, you need to kind of take that into consideration, but we'll discuss that a little bit later on. And measuring the internal diameter of this is where these come really in handy. And what this is a drill bit set that goes from 1 millimeter all the way up to 5.9 millimeters in 0.1 millimeter increments. And it just means that you can measure the internal diameter quite easily using one of these drill bits. And I know that 4.8 works really well within my set of drones, something around 4.8. So if I just put that in gently, don't put it in too hard because you can split the cane. If it fits, it fits. If not, go smaller. And that is fitting really nicely in there. And I have some bits of bass drone cane here, and I'm just gonna put that in. That's actually a little bit loose. It's probably about 4.9 or 5 millimeter. That is actually a little bit tight. So that's probably around 4.6, 4.7. That is a perfect fit. And that is a perfect fit too. So to be honest, any of these pieces, if it's 0.3 millimeters kind of either side, then you should be all right. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But these two pieces of cane here are going to be perfect. And I just want to make sure that they are going to be the right length. You just need to make sure they're a little bit longer. I much prefer to cut these end nodes off. Now, if it is quite short, then what you can do is you can just get some sealing wax and you can seal the end node itself to make sure it's airtight. But either of these two pieces are going to work really well for me, so I am happy to carry on and start preparing these pieces of cane. So I have two pieces of drone cane that are going to work really well in my set. I know that they're near enough the same internal diameter of the reed that I'm trying to copy. And if you have a little bit of this kind of stalk protrusion that's coming out, you can just get your Stanley blade and cut that off. Because what we're going to do now is actually cut the node off. And I'm just looking at both of them, and I'm just going to select the piece that is slightly longer. And the first thing that I need to do is where the node end is, I'm just going to mark the length. So just getting my pencil, I'm just going to mark ever so slightly longer at the node end than my original reed. And we're going to cut that off, and safety glasses on for this. Stanley knife. And you just want to get where your mark is and start rolling and cutting. Keep your fingers a fair distance away. You do need to put a bit of force on it, but you'll feel it actually start to go through the cane. And that is a nice clean cut. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I just want to scrape some of the bark off where we're actually going to tie the binding where it goes into your socket. And it's just because the hemp itself, and don't use the pre-waxed hemp that you can get from the uilleann, it doesn't stick as well. You're going to need to use cobbler's waxed hemp. So that's why we have the cobbler's wax. But all you need to do is just literally scrape some of the bark off, probably about 10, 15 millimeters from the bottom, and just scrape this off. And at this point, depending on what kind of socket, if you have a tapered socket, you're going to need to do a little bit more work and taper this end. But I know that my socket's straight. So all I need to do is just scrape some of this bark off. Comes off nice and easy. That's about enough. And then get some sandpaper, wrap it in, and just give it a good twist. And this is just kind of smoothing it off nicely. So that's good enough. And that's a nice smooth finish there. So now I'm going to wax some hemp and just get a bit. Now, I have a vise at the end of the table. You can tie it onto anything that is solid. Get my cobbler's wax, and I'm just going to run this up and down about an arm's length of this hemp. Get it on as many sides as you can. And then when it's gone nice and black, I just have a piece of leather, but you can use any kind of material. You just want to trap this in the piece of leather and then run it up and down, get a bit of heat into it. And this just gets the cobbler's wax soaked into your piece of hemp. Now, just going to cut this end off. Same with the other end. And I have my piece of waxed hemp. So I'm just going to tie a loop like so, just a normal loop. And about halfway down where I've scraped off the bark, and then trap the piece that you're holding with your thumb and your forefinger, and then just twist it round and come back up again. While I have it, I'm just going to cut this small bit off, and I have my base drone here, and I'm just going to check for fit and give it a good twist round, because that will actually help the hemp to settle. It's still a little loose, so I'm just going to go up one more time, see what that's like. Again, don't force this, you just get it kind of by feel. But twist it round, because that will cause the hemp to compact, and it will compact over time. And I'm just going to give it one more twist down. And the great thing about the cobbler's wax is that it is super sticky. There's no need to tie a knot in this. I'm just going to put it back in, wrong end. Yeah, and that is a really nice solid fit. So now all I'm going to do is cut this off. I always keep waxed hemp because it really does come in handy. So this now has the binding that's going to go into the tenon. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a piece of cork, and I'm just going to cut off a piece of cork like that, and just cut a little wedge. And I'm just going to pop the wedge in to the top hole. Just poke it in there, about 1 millimeter. Get my candle and lighter. And sealing wax. And not too close to the flame, just a few millimeters away. Just kind of turn it. You'll see it starting to get quite shiny. And you just want to dab it on. Dab it into the hole, just so that you have a nice bit sealed on. And then don't worry if it's a bit of a mess like this. All you need to do is just hold it close to the flame and kind of twist it around. And what will happen is it will just melt the wax and kind of get it looking good again. And then don't blow this too hard, but just give it a nice gentle blow just to set it. Okay. And if you want, you can just pick any of these kind of little bits at the side. So what I will do now, I just want to make sure it's airtight, and it is airtight, but yeah, that is fully airtight now. So the last thing that I need to do to prepare this is just get some of my cotton and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to tie a binding at the opposite end to what goes in the socket. And the reason that I'm tying a binding here is I got a great tip from Alan Moller, And what Alan Moller said in his YouTube video on reed making, the link will be in the description below. What Alan said is that if you cut your reed in the traditional way, like this, so it's going into your socket, into the stock, the air pressure's coming this way, what it's doing is it's actually bending the tip of your reed back. So what Alan said was to flip the reed the other way and have the tongue coming downwards. And what that does is it actually forces the reed to close. And he said that increases the longevity of the reed. Now, I've only been cutting them this way for about the last few months, so I haven't really noticed much of a difference. But it sounded like a very good idea to me. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get a piece of thread that is probably about 20 centimeters long, doesn't have to be too long at all. And then I have a slightly longer piece of thread. And again, I'm just going to tie a loop in this, like so. And I'm going to pop the reed through the loop. And then probably about, I don't know, 10-ish mil. Again, I'm just going to trap the piece that I'm holding here. And then you actually want to tie this quite tight. Not so tight that it actually will break the thread, but get a good bit of force. And Alan said that this as well helps the reed to split when it comes to cutting and splitting the tongue. And also when you split it, it's not going to split any further than where the thread is. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to hold on to this piece, get my Stanley and cut that off. Then with the other piece of thread, you just need to get it so that it's kind of even like that. And I'm just going to create this kind of a loop. You just hold down there and then wind back over, back up and over towards the loop. Don't tie it too tightly now because you'll see what we're going to do in a minute. I'm just going to wind it back down. And then I'm going to get the end of my thread and I'm just going to pop it through this loop. Pull it through and then get the two ends that are poking down. Tidy this up a bit. Pull that through until it's nice and tight. Wrap my fingers through like so and then give it a really good pull. And what that's done is it's actually pulled the thread through so you don't need to tie a knot and you've got a really nice secure finish there. And that is my reed now ready to go. Okay, so I'm now ready to cut the tongue. And the first thing that I want to do is find out where the curve is. And some people, there's always a bit of a curve. Some people will cut into the curve, so on the inside of the curve, but I prefer to cut on the outside of the curve. And all you need to do is just put it on a flat surface. And if you just roll it, you'll actually be able to see more light on one end, less light on the other. And I can see that the curve on this is actually, it's curved on this side. And I'm going to want to cut on this side here rather than on the inside, the opposite side. So the first thing that I'm going to do is get my triangular needle file and I'm just going to score on the top of the curve, probably I'd say around about 8 to 10 millimeters away from where your binding to go in the socket is. And I'm just going to make a little score there. And I'm just going to turn it slightly so that you're getting fairly long curve. And then what I'm going to do at a 45-degree angle, I'm just going to join that up on one side, turn it around and do the other side. But you don't need to go particularly deep on this. You are literally you're just scoring where the bark is. So it just gives the razor blade a helping hand in actually getting through. And then you're going to get your closed back razor blade. And then what I'm doing, I'm just seeing where the score is. And at about a 45-degree angle, I'm just going to put it where the score mark is. And what you want to do, it's just a seesawing motion. It just seesaws like this, up and down. You're not actually cutting it. You're putting a bit of pressure on it. And quite quickly, you'll find that that actually gets stuck in. So it's about a 45-degree angle like so. Keep going. And it just goes into the cane like that. Now, the depth that you go is quite important. And you don't want to go in too deep. If you do, it's not the end of the world. It just means when it comes to voicing it, you're going to need to do a little bit more work. But what we're going to do here is ideally you want to go about a quarter to a third of the actual width of your piece of cane. So I'm just going to go further. It's still got a way to go. Just checking that. I'm going to straighten it up a bit. And again, I want to go a little deeper than that. Not a lot, but just a small little bit. As I say, if you go too far, it makes the tongue too stiff. So that just means that you basically need to loosen the tongue a bit, which means you're going to need to, when the time comes, scrape a lot more there. But I am there or thereabouts happy with that. I'm just making sure it's all straight. And it is. And then before you actually split the tongue, what you want to do is just pull this out a tiny bit. We're talking probably the width of a spider's leg, but you're just making sure that it just comes up ever so slightly out of the cane itself so that the actual blade itself, when you come to split it, it doesn't get stuck there and split basically the cane around here. So once you're ready to go, you just put it on the mat and then with a bit of force, you split the cane. Now, I have a piece of plastic here. I actually cut it off of this book. It's just very thin plastic. It's quite flexible. Any bit of plastic will do, but I find that this is a really good way of splitting the tongue. And you just kind of lift it, get the bit of plastic in, and then what you're doing, I'll do it so it's facing you, is you just run it down all the way down to where that binding is, like so. And while I have it like this, I'm just going to check and make sure that there's no kind of fibers or anything like that. And there isn't. It looks like a really nice clean cut, which again, I find using this kind of flexible plastic, it really does make a massive difference when it comes to splitting the tongue. Now, the next really important step, and I got this tip from watching Medir's Heart of the Instrument DVD, and it was a tip that Benedict Kohler gave. And what he said was, if you lick the end, the tip here, what happened when you were actually forcing the blade in was the cane itself, it doesn't go anywhere. What it actually does is it gets pushed apart. So what Benedict says is if you just lick this end, the tip, get a good bit of moisture on there, and then hold this closed for about a minute. And I just put like a little bit of kind of pressure, get a little bit of heat into it. And what that does, the moisture actually re-expands the cane. And I'd noticed when I started cutting tongues, until I started doing this licking, I'd noticed that the seal wasn't great, but as soon as I started actually licking it and then holding it shut and letting the cane re-expand, you actually, when you hold it shut, get a much better seal. And that is a really nice seal. It's never going to be 100% airtight once you actually split it, but this is a good seal. Yeah. So I'm really happy with this. And again, I'm always just kind of checking just to see if there's any little kind of stray fibers or anything like that on either side. If there is, you can just kind of pick them off. But this is a really nice clean cut. And the first thing that I'm going to do, just rub it between your hands like this for about 30 seconds. Gets a bit of heat into the reed. And again, it just twists the fibers and it just makes the tongue a little bit more pliable. Now, when you need to test the reed, what you do is you just kind of suck it a little. And voicing it basically means that you're just getting a sound out. And for a bass reed, you actually want to be able to see some daylight almost in between the tip of the reed and the body of the reed. You're going to want to see like a little bit of light actually coming through there, not too much. If you're making a tenor or a baritone, there's barely any lift in those. But for a bass reed, you're going to want to see some daylight. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and if you went a little bit too deep, you're going to have to do quite a bit of this. I'm going to just lift the tongue, take it away from the body a bit. And I'm going to get my Stanley blade, and I'm just going to scrape this kind of bottom, say about a quarter. I'm just going to scrape this, scrape some of the bark off. And what that does is it just allows the reed to flex a little. Now, if you went too deep, you're going to have to scrape quite a bit of bark off the reed itself, because the reed is going to be too stiff, the tongue, if it's too thick. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start bending the tip. So I'm just pulling it up like this, and I'm putting my thumb about halfway, and I'm starting to give it a good bit of pressure there. Move your finger up close to the tip and further back down. And yeah, I'm starting to see a nice bit of daylight through that now. Okay, I'm getting a bit of noise. I'm actually going to put it into my bass drone. I've got the end off, and just suck. Okay, so it is actually starting to work. So this is good. And you can see there is quite a nice bit of daylight there now. It's not sounding the greatest by sucking on it. But it's almost there. And as I say, you can just pop it in to your bass. And it is starting to make some noise. So some people, they do like to mouth blow these and just kind of test them out by actually mouth blowing. You put it into your socket and yeah, like so. I prefer not to do that. And the reason being is that you'll actually vary the amount of pressure that you're blowing, and you might be blowing less pressure, you might be blowing more pressure. But what eventually happens is that you will actually blow it into work, whereas when you then put it into your stock, the pressure is what the pressure is, and it'll either work or it won't. And I tend to find the bass drone, you can mouth blow them, but then you put it into the stock and it just does not work. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get my set and we're going to fine tune and adjust this now that we're actually getting some noise out of it. We're at a position now where we can start to fine tune and adjust. So I've got my set now. I've got a bit of my bass drone. Again, when you suck on the end of your bass drone, it is working. It doesn't sound particularly stable, but we'll get there. We'll adjust it. So anyway, so the reed is voiced. And these things, what these are silicone plugs. And I got this tip off of Josh Bailey, who's an American pipe maker. And these come really in handy. And what you can do is you can just pop them into the ends of your drones. And what that does is it actually means that you can just concentrate on the one drone. And these will actually fit in every single hole of your chanter. So you can really closely inspect for air tightness every single bit of your set. And what you want is you want your set to be really airtight. This is really important. And if you've got kind of any major leaks or even minor leaks, what can happen is that the drones can fluctuate. So I always check my set every now and again just to make sure it's nice and airtight. And before I started this video, I made sure it was 100% airtight, and it is. So I've got my set. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop the end on. And I've heard basically that you want your reeds facing up when you put them into the stock. So I'm just going to pop it in. And I'm just going to see what happens. It might not work, it might work, but I wouldn't be too worried yet if it doesn't. Okay, so it is working. But it's kind of fluctuating. You probably heard the pitch going up and down a little bit there when I put a bit more pressure, less pressure. So it's quite unstable. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put some sealing wax around the tip here. And I'm just going to dab some sealing wax onto this. And what that's going to do is it's going to give it a bit of weight to the tip, which has two effects. That flattens the reed, and it also makes it louder. And I find that it also balances, so maybe three effects. So again, I'm just going to, holding it kind of close, and I just like to have this up a little bit because you don't want to get it on the sides or in the actual hole itself. I'm just going to dab a bit on. Just give it a really gentle blow. Just going to get a little bit more. And again, just dab it. Dab it on. That's the first thing that I'm doing. A bit more. You can always just scrape this off with your Stanley blade. Okay. So what I'll do, before I do anything else, I just want to see what kind of effect this has had. Now, you can use blue tack. There's people that do. But what happens if the blue tack gets stuck in your stock, it can solidify and it can become a real disaster trying to actually get it out. So I'd always recommend taking a bit more time and just using sealing wax. So again, I'm just going to pop this in. I'll pop it into my stock. And we'll give it a try. Okay, so again, we are still getting that kind of up and down pitch, but I've got a bit of weight on the end. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on a bridle. And you can tie a bridle with a piece of thread, but what I've found, because I started making composite drone reeds, so that'll be the next video that I do, where you actually use the body of a piece of cane and you attach a wooden or a plastic tongue. And I experimented with that a good bit last summer, and I found them to be super stable and really good. And to be honest, now it's my preference of making a drone reed would be to use a spruce tongue and a cane body. But what I found, because like it's sloping, if you tied a bridle, if you try to push it towards the end is narrower. So what I found were these hair braids, and you can get these off of Amazon, same as you can get the plugs off of Amazon. And these, I think they're like a couple of quid for about 2,000 of them. And they're used for like braiding hair. They're just elastic band ties. And I've just found them really handy. I don't think they will ever perish or anything like that. They're better than O-rings, because O-rings, it's either kind of one size fits all. They start rolling. And I just literally fold these on, get them kind of all together. Give them a bit of a twist and over. And then once you've done that a few times, just kind of gather it all together so it's all in a bit of a straight line. Unfortunately, they're clear and you probably can't see them very well. But we're going to see what this does now. So just pop this in here. If your drones are fluctuating in pitch, it tends to mean that you need to have a bride. And if they go up in pitch, so they get higher, it means that the reed wants to be sharper. So you actually have to shorten the tongue by pushing the bridle up close to the tip. If it goes flatter, you do the opposite. It goes away from the tip. So I'm just going to pop this in now and see whether that's made any difference. It may slightly be going up in pitch, but it's ever so slightly, and I'm really putting, with my bellows and bag, quite a bit of pressure on. I'm actually going to get the tuning app on my phone and just double check this. I think it is increasing just ever so slightly. According to this, it is rock solid right there. It's a tiny bit sharp. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lengthen my drone to see if I can get it into tune. And try again. Sometimes when you lengthen the drone, when you're at this fine tuning stage, what can happen is that it starts fluctuating in pitch again once you actually lengthen the whole drone itself. Now again, I'm putting that under a good bit of pressure. It's actually in tune to D now. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pop out my baritone drone and see how this sounds now, the two of them, the bass and the baritone. Okay, so it's actually sounding quite good. So I'm just going to try the tenor now. Okay, the baritone didn't go in there, but... Okay, so I'm really happy. Everything seems to be really good. They sound nice. It's at a pretty good volume. Could maybe get a little bit louder. If you want to get it louder, you just need to slightly increase the lift in the tongue or put a little bit more weight on the tip using the sealing wax. But as things stand... yeah, I'm fairly happy with that. So one thing that I do want to make sure, and I haven't done this yet, is just make sure that when I touch the hole where the air and the noise is coming out, it's actually going to stop. So okay, so that has now stopped all the reeds off, and I can restart it, restart them all one by one. Just retuning my baritone there slightly to the tenor. And yeah, no, I'm really happy with this now. Now that I've tuned that baritone slightly more, it's actually sitting really nicely, I think. They're sounding really nice. They're all, when I'm flipping my switch, they're all coming on. If I put a lot of pressure, for some reason the baritone now isn't kicking in, but... I wouldn't worry about that too much. What I would want to do now is I'd probably want to just play this in for a day or two and just get it kind of settled. Because it's been a piece of cane for all of its life, when you actually cut it and then start trying to bend and shape it, it wants to go back to where it was, where it naturally was before you did any cutting and kind of bending of the tip. So it does take a little while. So if you came back to this tomorrow and it actually turned out that it wasn't working as well, then again, just kind of play it in, give it maybe a little bit more scrape, a little bit of a bend, just... Okay, so right now I'm actually really happy. That was fairly straightforward. So they can be a little bit tricky, the drone reeds, when it comes to actually adjusting them. The bass normally always needs a bit of weight, so use some sealing wax. I don't find the baritone and tenor you kind of really need to do that. So with the bass as well, it sometimes takes a little bit of punch to kind of kick it in. And if you ever get a drone reed that kind of stops working, or when you're putting it under quite a bit of pressure, it doesn't kick in, don't do this thing of getting like a body hair. and sticking it in the tongue. I find that is not a good way of fixing that problem. What you need to do is just right at the base of the tongue, wherever your bridle or whatever it is, just give a little bit more of a scrape there. Maybe just kind of bend the tip tiny bit. Once you've got it voiced, all of this is just small, little, tiny little things. When you were trying to voice it, I was putting quite a bit of pressure on the tip to kind of get it to bend and just have that little bit of lift. But now that it's working and it's fairly well balanced, yeah, the baritone, for some reason now, it was working perfectly until I put this reed in. But it's just taking a little bit less pressure on the bag to kick the baritone in for some reason. But yeah, so that's working nicely now. And this table shows you all the adjustments that you can make to either your reed or your drones in order to get your new reed balanced and working really nicely within your own set. The adjustments at the top of the table have a greater effect than those at the bottom. And lengthening or shortening your drone reed tongue is done by using the bridle and pushing it either further away from the tip to lengthen or pulling it closer towards the tip to shorten. So if you didn't have a reed to copy and you find that the new reed that you're putting into your drone works great when your tuning slide is at a certain length, but when you try and either lengthen or shorten the tuning slide to get it to the correct pitch, it could start fluctuating or it could even jump the octave. And if you've tried all the other adjustments and the reed just won't settle at the right point of your tuning slide, it's either too sharp or it's too flat, then this is where the internal diameter comes in. So if the reed's too sharp, you just basically need to make a copy of the reed that you just made, but use a piece of cane that has a larger internal diameter. And if it's too flat, use a piece of cane with a smaller internal diameter. So I'm really happy with how everything's going with this new bass reed. There's just a couple of things that I want to do. And it's definitely under the usual pressure that I would have started my drones off with. It's definitely the baritone's not kicking in. But if I just take the pressure off ever so slightly, the baritone kicks in. So rather than mess around with my baritone, the baritone was working perfectly. I would just start playing this bass reed in for the next couple of days and making small little adjustments. And by adjustments, I'd probably scrape a small little bit away at the base, maybe just try and kind of lift that tongue a little bit more and just see what happens over the next couple of days. But with the tiniest little bit less pressure than my elbow is normally used to, everything's kicking in. So the first thing that I want to do is I actually want to put the whole system under quite a bit of pressure and just see what that does to the pitch and just check it on the phone. So I'm just going to kick these in and then I'm going to put quite a lot of pressure on the bag and use the bellows as well to force a lot of air through. And I just put quite a bit of pressure on that and it is bang on D. So I'm going to get my chanter and just have a little go and see what it's like with the chanter. Okay, so it's working pretty well with the chanter. It sounds nicely in tune. It stops when I take all the pressure off the bag. The drones stop immediately. All I want to do now is I've already put it under quite a bit of pressure, but I just want to check that the playing pressure to get up to the top of the second octave is going to work with the chanter. So Okay, so it's getting all the way right to the very top of the second octave there, and nothing is cutting out. Again, the baritone didn't cut in a couple of times there, which, again, I'm not going to let it worry me right now. I'm just going to play this in over the next couple of days and see what I need to do then. But the very last thing that I would do is start messing around with the baritone reed, because it was working perfectly well before I put this reed in. And reeds and drones, they can be a little bit tricky. You need a bit of patience and a bit of time and a bit of trial and error to get everything sitting really well and nice. But you should have everything where it is really, really stable and working well. So I hope you have really enjoyed this, and I hope you found it useful. Please leave any comments in the comments section below. And the next video that I'm going to do is a video on making composite drone reeds out of cane bodies and spruce tongues, or plastic or wooden tongues. So I really hope, as I say, you enjoyed it, and I will see you the next time. Thank you.